In 2003, Tom Anderson and Chris DeWolfe started Myspace, a platform that they hoped would connect people to their friends, allow individuals to customize their profiles, and of course, share music. So what happened to Myspace that caused them to fail, and how can we learn from their mistakes as small businesses? Let's get into it. So welcome back to Theory Why. My name is Rob Johnson. So we're talking about Myspace today. It is the butt of a lot of social media jokes in 2023, unfortunately. But 20 years after the launch of this platform, I thought it would be good to just do a quick diagnosis of what happened to Facebook, what mistakes they made, and just assess how businesses can go off the rails, especially ones that are as popular as MySpace. So in MySpace's peak in popularity, they had roughly 75 million users, and that sounds like a lot until you realize that Facebook today has billions of users, and it's almost half of the world population uses Facebook, whereas MySpace's peak was just a little bit over 75 million. So you can kind of see the differences in visits and how a platform can grow and evolve. But when MySpace started, it was, and if you're under 20, I would imagine that this is going to go completely over your head, but you got to think about the time. So this is 2003, 2004, 2005. The internet was relatively new, especially to younger people. And you had this website that was incredibly customizable, incredibly social in terms of how you commented and reacted, and it was something that was brand new, and it was really exciting. So I remember when I had a MySpace page, one thing that you would always look at is you'd have these your top friends lists, and I can't remember if you could do a top 5 or a top 10, or if you could make that a certain amount. I'm sure you could, but top 10 seems to be in my head. So you'd figure out, okay, here's who my top 10 friends are on my page, and then you'd rank them in order. So I would always go to my friends page to see where I would rank on their list. So it was just this very, I don't even know what the term would be, but it's a way to make you feel less than. It's something that you would not do today. It's a way to make you feel like you're not cool at all, because you're going to all your friends' page. You're like, why am I 8th? This dude's 2nd, and then the biggest burn would be if you were upset with someone and they were in your number 1 category, you would drop them down just to let them know that they've fallen from grace. So it was a very honest way of letting people know where they stand. Whereas right now, we just mute them on Facebook for 30 days because we don't want to see their terrible posts. So it's a much less passive aggressive way of doing things than what we do now, I would suppose. But one of the reasons that MySpace failed was they didn't recognize trends in the marketplace. As Facebook had developed and launched in 2004, and it grew to popularity between 2004 and 2008, MySpace had a similar rise in popularity, but Facebook ended up prioritizing mobile platforms and security protocols much more than MySpace, which ultimately led to their demise. So when you look at what Facebook and MySpace did in the social media realm, Facebook highly prioritized the interface. They made it very simple. Here's how you log in. Here's how you make a post. Here's how you connect with a friend. MySpace was a lot more customizable. So if you're in the computing game, MySpace was like the Linux of social media, and Facebook was like the Mac OS. So one is very easy to use. It's easy to understand. You know where everything is intuitively. The other one, you might go to one person's profile and it's blaring an AC/DC song and it's a hot pink background with black text. And then you go to another person's profile and it's, Barry Manilow. So you could just have so much customization that there was no consistency to what you were going to get. And then all of the features were, in my opinion, too much customization, because at a certain point, like I know at least for me, it was so much work to go back and undo all of the things that you did. It just made it difficult to even want to get back in there and interact and do things. Whereas with Facebook, it's always been the same. You have one timeline, you have one feed, You have the wall, which is, the collection of everybody's things that you follow and all of your friends. And it was just a lot more simplistic. And that ultimately, I believe, was the reason that MySpace failed, was because they didn't innovate. They didn't simplify things that were scalable. They appealed to a younger generation that were interested in customizing things and obviously being incredibly petty with top 10 lists, but they didn't do anything beyond that. And one of the other reasons I think Facebook continued to grow was because they invested in a business platform, and that business platform generated ad revenue. And those ads helped sustain and grow Facebook far beyond anything that MySpace was capable of doing. So when I look at, a simple case study of MySpace, I think a lot about what do people want from a user perspective, and also how, as a technology company, can you steer people to where you want to see the market grow and expand. And that's something that's a difficult balance for businesses, because in one respect, you don't want to take too much of the feedback from your customers, because a lot of times that feedback isn't informed on what you as a business should be doing in the marketplace. I'll give you an example. So if in 2007, when Steve Jobs launched the iPhone, if he would have listened to everybody and they would have said, oh yeah, we want a much better Palm Pilot, we want a much better PDA, we want a better usable clipboard or keyboard rather on our smartphones. If he would have listened to all of that feedback, he would have developed something very different than the iPhone. Instead, he developed the iPhone, which had no keyboard. It was 100% touchscreen, and it was something that hadn't been in the marketplace before. So in one respect, you want to listen to what people want, which is change, but you also want to set the tone or the narrative for where that particular marketplace should be going. And Facebook has always done a phenomenal job at this. I've always given them a ton of credit. Mark Zuckerberg is an extremely insightful person when it comes to trends and understanding where people ought to be going. And you can look at this with the acquisition that Facebook made of Instagram, WhatsApp, what they've done with Facebook Marketplace, and how they took a platform like Craigslist that was very seedy and we'll say sketchy, and turned it into a reputable platform inside of their ecosystem with Facebook Marketplace. And you can just see how those trends develop. One thing that I've always liked about Zuckerberg as well is that he's willing to take chances on things to see if they're going to be effective or not. So a couple of years ago at our agency, we were pushing RSS feeds into Facebook, and Facebook was releasing podcasts on business pages. So it was another distribution platform similar to Apple and Spotify. They piloted that for about 8 to 12 months, and then they decided to stop doing it. And they did the same thing with like audio only chat rooms. They piloted those and then decided to stop doing them. So they're willing to just try things to see if they're going to be effective and catch on. And they're also willing to let those things go so they can grow well. In MySpace, I just don't think had the time in market to do all of those things, because they were so focused on the customization aspect and the community aspect of younger users. They didn't think about how ad revenue could be generated from older users, business owners, and the like. And that was one thing that was really appealing to me about Facebook. Was in 2007, they had almost 100,000 businesses signed up to the platform. And between 2007 and 2010, they rolled out and developed Facebook pages for businesses. And then on the heels of that, started marketing their advertising services. And people were paying for Facebook ads in droves. And it really expanded the company in a way that hadn't been done before online. And then you tie that in with the acquisition of Instagram and being able to run ads on that platform, and Facebook and Instagram being connected. And you can start to see how the giant that is Facebook eclipsed all other social media platforms. And MySpace was just in its wake. And they had nothing that they could do at that point to overtake Facebook, because they had put themselves in such a different hole that there was no way they were going to dig themselves out and then try and surpass a giant that was already miles ahead of them. So MySpace today is largely a music sharing platform, much smaller in scale. It's for artists. They really turned into they took that music aspect of the platform and doubled down on it. And Tom and Chris ended up selling the company and went to, and it just kind of pigeonholed itself into a music only platform. So for our intents and purposes today, the MySpace social media platform is dead. It's largely music only. And as I think about this from a business owner perspective, like what things we can learn from this, a lot of it is you never want to put yourself in one particular box without the ability to diversify and expand. So for example, when you look at a business like mine and you think about social media, if we were a Facebook only social media company and we only have processes and procedures around how to make Facebook great and how to help business owners do the best they can on that one particular platform, and then something happened to Facebook, let's say the Cambridge Analytica scandal in 2016 ended up being much worse for them than it actually was, and Facebook went away, all of our eggs were in the Facebook basket. It'll be very hard to pivot and make ourselves experts on Pinterest or TikTok or YouTube because we've invested all of our time and employee resources into that one platform. Whereas if you diversify and you have all of the social media platforms that you run on and you're constantly looking at new trends for new things that are coming, then you can diversify very quickly. So for example, at the beginning of this year in 2023, YouTube Shorts had recently broke into the marketplace, and it was very successful. It was gaining people a lot of attention, and it was allowing people to use short form content to promote long form content. So as an agency, we were, from what I've seen, at least here in Michigan, with a lot of the agencies I follow, we were the first one to jump on that bandwagon and educate and push that out to a lot of our clients to make sure that they were taking advantage of that platform. And we've offered similar things with the TikTok platform as well. So you never want to just pigeonhole yourself into, oh, we only do this and we're not going to change and we're not willing to diversify, because when you do those things, you run into a really bad position of, if that market crumbles, what are you going to do next? And I've talked about this on this show as well several times. In the pandemic, when 2020 hit, we built websites. We didn't build them at the volume that we do now. But when COVID hit and we lost half of our social media business, we really doubled down and started advertising for website development. And that was the one particular service that sustained us through 2020. So when you look at a company, you have to have this risk assessment, and it's always a balance. It'd be a lie for me to tell you, oh, you need to diversify and do everything. That's a mistake as well. If you try to be all things to all people, as we've talked about on the show before, you're going to run into a risk of spreading yourself too thin and not being particularly great at anything. So you have to have that balance where you're well diversified, but you're also well educated, knowledgeable, and you can execute on those areas that you offer. You can't say yes to everything, but you can't limit yourself so much that there's no diversification in your business. And I think ultimately that's what happened with MySpace, is they targeted and marketed themselves to solely young people. When they tried to make a leap to expand, Facebook had already eaten their lunch and moved on to dinner, and there was just no way for them to recover. So in business, it's very much the same thing. In small business especially, by the time you capture a trend and you've made that incredibly difficult turn to move from what you are doing to what you need to be doing. So once that turn has been made, there's a good chance there's several competitors in the marketplace that are already there ahead of you. And that's why I always encourage business owners to be open to change, assessing the market constantly. And we've done that here, like with the podcast studio. So the podcasting landscape has changed tremendously in the last 3 years since we've opened this studio here in Brighton. So short form content has become more popular. So we've started doing more short form packages. We have recognized that video podcasts are going to be where everything is moving to. And that was true in 2020. But I think in 2020, at least for us, podcasts were largely seen as an audio first platform. And now I think, 3 years later, they're absolutely seen as a video first platform. And I'm sure that's still up for debate, because I will tell you, almost every single client that I have that comes in that wants to produce a podcast, they still think audio first. They're not thinking about the video and the benefit that can come from that. So I think that's still one of those things that is heavily debatable When you think about podcast, you think about audio or video. But again, you have to be open to that change. You can't box yourself into something and say, this is all we're ever going to be and this is what we're going to do. That's how stagnation occurs, and ultimately that's how businesses close. So as I was going through this topic for today, I found one particular quote that I thought was really interesting. This is from Jeff Bezos. And he says, I believe you have to be willing to be misunderstood if you're going to innovate. Now, this idea of being misunderstood in business, I think is a quite powerful one, because when you start doing something and it's foreign to people, they haven't heard of it before, they haven't recognized the benefit of it, they're going to be like, well, that's a stupid idea. So Jeff Bezos in the 90s starts Amazon. I'm going to sell books online and it's going to evolve into this and that. Well, why would you sell books online when you have Borders and Barnes and Noble? Like, no one's going to want that. But he saw past all of that. He saw where the internet age was going. He saw where commerce was going, and he decided, hey, you know what? This is where I'm going to plant my flag. Digital is going to be where everything is going to need to be. And then, you know how the rest of the story goes. The rest is history. Amazon is now one of the largest companies in the world, certainly with one of the biggest footprints. And it's that willingness to live in the area of being misunderstood where a lot of the magic in business happens. And I've experienced that as well. When I started the podcast studio, I had several people tell me, who is going to want to use a commercial podcast studio? Like, what business owners are going to think that's a good idea? And they just couldn't understand the connection between audio and video content for businesses and driving revenue, growth, credibility. It was something hard for them to imagine. And then 3 years later, some of those people who said those things are now clients, because they now understand that connection, that time has proven it to be something of value, and now they understand. And it's not the fault of anybody in particular who questions why something is what it is or shouldn't work. It's completely normal to look at something and say, wow, I can't believe that took off, or I can't believe that idea was, so genius. So really though, if you're an entrepreneur and you're on this point of, well, I'm starting something and everyone seems to think that this isn't going to be successful, you have to weigh that. Where is that criticism coming from? Is it because they've seen examples of that failing before? Or is it just because it's a new concept that they don't understand? Because if you came to me right now and you said, hey, Rob, I'm going to open up a bookstore and it's going to be, in person only. There's no online sales. We're just going to get books from manufacturers. We're going to have people come in and buy books. I'd probably tell you that's not a good idea, because Amazon exists and Barnes and Noble exists, and Barnes and Noble is very heavy in the digital space as well. So they've been able to bridge, at least for now, that gap of being in person and digital. But if you're going to try and start one today and it has nothing to do with an online ecosystem, it's probably destined for failure. So that would be an example of, we've seen examples of these things fail before, not I don't understand the business concept. So you have to be able to weigh that. Lastly, today, I want to talk about Proverbs 4:7. It says, the beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom, and whatever you get insight. And this is, for me, one of my absolute favorite Proverbs, because it talks about the acquisition of knowledge, the acquisition of wisdom, being able to start at a point where you're learning, you're understanding, you're not teaching, you're not executing, you're just learning. And the other thing that I think I like a lot about this proverb is it's very instructional. So the beginning of wisdom is acquiring it. And then whenever you get that wisdom, gain additional insight into it. So look at it from different perspectives, look at it from different points of view, try to understand what you're learning from multiple angles. And that's something I think that, especially in today's very fast food society, headline only day and age, we tend to look at things from one perspective and not something else. We don't do enough research in shifting to the left or right to look at things from a different angle, Because when you do that, when you can look at things from other perspectives, you might not agree, but you can at least understand why someone might think the way they do. And it's the exact same thing in business. You might have different philosophies on how to do things, or different leadership styles, or different ways that you're going to run and scale your company. But when you can look at the way other people do it, and you can say, okay, that one piece might be very helpful. So I'm going to implement that, but because my business is of this nature, the whole system isn't going to work. And I've had this discussion before. There's different workings or philosophies to how to run and scale a business. And some people are very tied into this one system. And this one system, it's almost like they treat this one particular system like it's the Bible of how to run a business. And I don't necessarily think it's helpful, again, to pigeonhole yourself into this one philosophy, because once you do that, you run into the problem of, well, this book says I have to do it this exact way, and I can't deviate from that plan because I am now married to this operating system for how to run my business. And that takes a lot of the creative, out-of-the-box thinking out of that process. So for me, we here have a foundation that's rooted in the book Extreme Ownership. But if there's a problem in my business and that book can't solve that problem, I'm not going to throw my hands up and be like, well, it's not in there, so I guess we're just going to call it a day. We're going to add on other things to see how we can solve that problem. We're not just going to say it's this one particular operating system, that's all we're going to do. So there's benefit in gaining insight as you accumulate knowledge, because then it puts that education, that knowledge, that wisdom into a different context that can be usable in different circumstances. So again, like everything else we've talked about on this show before, there's more than just one way to accomplish something. And typically, if someone is very far on one end of the spectrum and another person is on the other end, the answer usually lies somewhere in the middle. And the answer is never a short fortune cookie type wisdom phrase. It needs to be something that has more depth, more context, and there's always going to be a balance between those two poles on the spectrum. So hopefully that helps. So one thing I wanted to mention today is that this podcast is sponsored by KeyBank. So I've mentioned before on the show how much of a strategic partner KeyBank has been for me and my business. We do all of our work with them through the organization, and they have been extremely helpful in not only being an excellent banking ally, but also being a very good strategic ally for us in helping us make the right moves, decide on when to pull triggers on certain things and when to be more patient. And one thing I really appreciated about them was their willingness just to come into the office and meet with me here in my business and ask questions about how we operate so they can understand how we do what we do, what our goals are. So if you want to know more about how to get started with KeyBank, they do such a phenomenal job with small businesses. They have something called the Small Business Check-In. You can either scan the QR code on the screen right now, or you can jump on down to the show notes, click on the link, and take 5 minutes and do your small business check-in today. So key.com, you can find all of the information there. I certainly appreciate them being a partner for this show. So apart from that, we will wrap up. And I appreciate all of you listening, whether you're on YouTube, Apple, Spotify. If you are an audio-only listener, there is a video of this podcast as well. And if you're solely finding this show on YouTube, just know that it is portable and you can listen to it on all of the major podcasting platforms as well. So I appreciate all of you listening. We'll catch you next week. Take care.